Was talking to an assisted living facility owner recently, and just like every other conversation, it started the same way. I just want to make sure I'm getting the best deal. Pretty normal, right? But by the end of that conversation, price had absolutely nothing to do with why he switched. And if you're in insurance, this is one of the biggest mistakes you can make because if you stay in the price conversation, you're going to lose more deals than you win. But if you understand what's actually driving that question, you'll start closing a whole lot more of those deals. In this video, I'll show you how to use price to get in the door, how to figure out what your prospect is actually worried about, and how to turn that into a clear plan that gets them to say yes. But before we get into how to actually do that, let me show you what this looks like in the real world. I was talking to that assisted living facility owner, and like I said, the conversation started with price. I just want to make sure I'm getting the best deal. So, on the surface, it sounds like a price shopper. But when we actually started digging into it, here's what I found. He had his property insurance with one broker, his liability and workers' comp with a completely different broker. He felt pretty good about the property guy, but he really didn't like the other one. And more importantly, he had no real strategy for how his insurance was being handled, no clear plan, no control over how his account was going to market, and multiple people he had to talk to just to get anything done. So when he said, I feel like I'm paying too much, that really wasn't about price. What he was actually feeling was that everything was disorganized, out of his control, and not working the way it should. And that's when it clicked for me. There are really only four reasons people buy insurance: there's price, coverage, service, and relationship. And here's the part that's a little counterintuitive. Price is almost always what gets someone to reach out, but it's almost never what gets them to actually move forward. Because when someone says, I feel like I'm paying too much, you have to understand what they actually mean. Sometimes it means their coverage is all over the place. Sometimes it means they don't understand what they're paying for. Sometimes it means they don't trust the person they're working with. But almost every time, there's something underneath that statement. And if you stay at the surface level, just talking about numbers, you miss the real reason they're even having the conversation in the first place. And here's the truth most producers don't realize: nobody writes a check because something is cheap. They write a check because it feels right, because they understand what they're getting, because it makes sense for their situation, and because they trust the person who's walking them through it. So let's talk about where most producers go wrong. Someone says, I feel like I'm paying too much. And the immediate reaction is to go get quotes or to just walk away, to shop the market, try to find the better number, and hope that's enough to win the deal. But here's the problem with that approach. Now you've positioned yourself exactly the same as everyone else. You're just another number. And if you're just another number, the only way to win is to be the lowest one. That's the race to the bottom. And it's a race you don't want to be in. So instead of competing there, you have to flip the process. Use price as the hook, but don't stay there. When someone brings up price, that's your opportunity to go deeper, to ask better questions, to figure out what's actually driving that feeling. Because once you understand that, now you're not just quoting insurance, you're solving a problem. And the second you make that shift, everything changes. Because now you're not competing on who's cheapest, you're competing on who understands the situation the best and has the clearest plan to fix it. And that's a completely different conversation. So, what does this actually look like in a real conversation? Because this is where the difference gets made. Most people hear, I feel like I'm paying too much, and they react. But what you want to do is slow that moment down. First, you agree with it. You say, yeah, that makes sense. A lot of people feel that way. Now, you're not fighting them, you're aligned with them. Then you ask one simple question: what makes you feel that way? And then you just listen, because what they say next is everything. That's where you'll hear things like, my coverage is kind of all over the place. I don't really understand what I have. My broker doesn't really get what we do. That's the real conversation. And once you hear that, now your job is to build a plan around it, not just a cheaper quote, a better way to handle the situation, a clearer structure, a more controlled process. Because when you do that, you're no longer just another option. You're the person who actually figured out what was wrong and showed them how to fix it. And that's what gets people to move forward. So let's go back to that assisted living owner. Remember, he came into the conversation thinking this was about price, but what actually got him to move forward had nothing to do with finding the cheapest option. What made the difference was having a clear plan, consolidating everything under one broker, creating a strategy for how his account was going to go to market, and putting a process in place so this wasn't something he had to keep guessing about every year. What changed wasn't just the numbers. What changed was how he felt about the entire situation. He went from feeling scattered to feeling in control, from not trusting the process to understanding exactly what was happening and why. And that's why he moved forward, not because it was cheaper, because it made sense, because it felt right, and because he trusted the plan. So if you take one thing away from this, it's this: price might open the door, but clarity, confidence, and trust are what actually close the deal. If you sound like everyone else just throwing out numbers, you'll get treated like everyone else. But if you can help someone understand their situation better than anyone else, you don't have to be the cheapest option to win. You just have to be the clearest one. And if you want to get better at actually running those conversations, asking the right questions, uncovering the real problems, and positioning your solution the right way, then you're going to want to watch this next video, because that's where I break down exactly how to run a qualifying conversation that sets all of this up the right way. So click here and I'll walk you through it.